गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबको दोबारा स्वागत है। प्रणाम, वणक्कम और सत श्री अकाल। एक हफ्ते से हम ये पावर मैट्रिक्स के बारे में जो नया उभरता आ रहा है उसके बारे में हम बात कर रहे थे। और इस पावर मैट्रिक्स में हमने देखा कि एक ये जो पावर क्वाड्रिलैटरल बन रहा है उसमें यूएसए और इंडिया के बीच में आकर्षण है और चाइना और रशिया के बीच में आकर्षण है। बाकी इंटर रिलेशनशिप जो है वो कुछ तनाव है और कुछ आकर्षण है। और इसी का विश्लेषण हमने 5 एपिसोड्स में विश्लेषण किया। और ये जो विश्लेषण बहुत बारीकी से हमने देखा, पहले की आउटलाइंस ऑफ द ग्लोबल पावर मैट्रिक्स, उसके बाद हमने देखा इंडिया चाइना इन द पावर मैट्रिक्स, इंडिया रशिया इन द ग्लोबल पावर मैट्रिक्स और इंडिया यूएसए इन द ग्लोबल पावर मैट्रिक्स। आखिर में हमने एक ओवरऑल व्यूइंग एनालिसिस किया ग्लोबल पावर मैट्रिक्स के बारे में। ये जो ओवरव्यूइंग एनालिसिस ऑफ द ग्लोबल पावर मैट्रिक्स हमने जो किया है, इसमें हमने 3 मुद्दे उठाए और ये तीनों मुद्दों को अलग अलग हमने डिस्कस किया। पर ये तीनों मुद्दे बहुत लंबे हो गए और तकरीबन 1 घंटे से ऊपर हो गए। इसीलिए हमने ये 3 मुद्दों को अलग 3 वीडियो इसके तरफ में जारी कर रहे हैं। राइट, ये जो आप अभी देख रहे हो ये दूसरे मुद्दे का है। क्या है ये मुद्दा? आगे अगर आप देखेंगे, भारत और चाइना दोनों सिविलाइजेशनल पावर्स हैं। राइट, और दुनिया के हिस्ट्री में कभी दो सिविलाइजेशनल पावर्स जो साथ साथ जिसके कंटेंशियस बॉर्डर्स हैं और क्लोज प्रॉक्सिमिटी में है, वो कभी साथ उभरे नहीं। राइट, अगर ऐसे, और हमारा एक प्रॉब्लम भी हुआ है, एक 62 में एक मेजर वॉर भी हो गया और बाकी किटपिट होते रहे और 2020 में एक मेजर कॉन्फ्रंटेशन भी हो गया। तो इस लिहाज से देखा जाए, क्या चाइना के साथ लड़ाई इनविटेबल है? क्योंकि ये हमारे जो स्ट्रेटेजिक सर्कल्स में और पब्लिक सर्कल्स में भी यही उम्मीद है कि एक दिन हमारा लड़ाई हो सकता है। अगर if it is inevitable or is it possible? If it is so, इसके साथ what are the guardrails we should be built into our current situation so that हम लड़ाई की ओर ना चले, राइट, लड़ाई ना हो। सर, I'll request Brig Arun Sahgal to प्लीज आपका विचार बताइए, उसके बाद हम बाकियों के विचार लेंगे।
Sir, you asked a very difficult question, and I am afraid I'm not a. Okay, let me try and answer this question. First and foremost, I wanted to say is that on the previous issue of diet coming up, uh, I did not say it. I forgot to mention it. The in global geopolitical terms, every country is strategic posturing. Is strategic posturing going on right now, rather than strategic alignments. Everybody is trying to fish out each other. Uh, that's one point. The second point is, as far as India-China relationships are concerned, there are two, three dynamics which are at play. We are both the civilizational states, like you rightly said. If you analyze the Chinese rhetoric or Chinese writing, etc., etc., Chinese never talk about maximum they go is to teach India a lesson along the line of actual control, but they are never sort of indicating territorial ambitions against India. There is a logic behind this. And my thinking basically is this, is that China remains, despite the fact it has got the very strong military, it is very strong economic power, it remains a regional power. It is not a global power. It cannot be a global power till such time it develops global credibilities and global credentials. And you develop global credibility and credentials not by having supply chains and economic relationships with the West or United States, but you have to create a global presence. China is now in the process of creating its global presence. In its creation of this global presence, China is trying to look at two, three areas of how do I proceed further. And when you start looking at from the Chinese perspective, sitting in Beijing, how do I proceed further? Like I said earlier, sir, that on the east there is a wall of 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 strong alliances being built against him by an offshore power or offshore balancer, United States, along with its allies, which is ensuring that the maximum Chinese can do is follow an offensive defensive strategy. Now you come down into the South China Sea, an area which it has surreptitiously taken control of, which everybody allowed China to do it. It started playing this nine-dash-line game, and it has succeeded. That has been done primarily to create a space for its movement across out of this conundrum of the South China Sea into the wider oceans, primarily in this case in the Indian Ocean. So, from the Chinese perspective, the Indian Ocean region, along with this partnership, like General Ahuja was talking about, that is creating equities in our neighborhood, through those equities is creating a strategy of countermanding India, not so much in the line of actual control, but in the maritime domain through the Indian Ocean region. The problem with the Chinese is this, and again, they have to shake out of South China Sea, enter the Indian Ocean region, and then find strategic spaces which they try to create. Hambantota is one, Gwadar is another. They tried in Maldives, they tried in Mauritius, and now then they're trying to go into relationship with Iran, etc., etc., etc. When India looks at the China challenge, we have this tendency to look at only from the continental domain. The Chinese challenge in the continental domain is a holding operation. It's a diversionary tactic. I will not solve the boundary issue. I will not solve the boundary issue primarily because I want to put India under pressure. But that was the tactic till about 5 to 6 years back. Now, what you have done is through your programs, we understand how they are, but from the Chinese perspective is that when you talk about their forward villages and infrastructure, etc., your infrastructure is bringing you closer to the last line of the mountain chain from where you descend into the valley. And the problem for the Chinese is this, is that after the 70 years, they have not yet managed to contain the Tibet and integrate Tibet fully into its psychological integration of Tibet has not yet taken place. And added to that, further northwestwards is the Xinjiang and Kashgar, etc., etc. So the area starting from North Kashgar, coming towards Tibet, southwestern China, is an area of a strategic vulnerability for the Chinese. It is strategic vulnerability, not so much or more, but it is because the population, the 9% of the Chinese minorities who live up in about say 35% of the Chinese territory are operating from this region. This is their home. So Hanization of this region has been done. The whole idea of this new permit system, the new laws, etc., is basically to further integrate the region through diktats. Something which we tried to do in the Northeast and then realized it was not possible, and then we came back to a more democratic order and decided that try to integrate. So this is the situation. So India and China, from Chinese perspective, a 7.5 trillion or a $10 trillion economy in India by 2030, supported by the United States, strong partnership in which you develop an intrinsic capacities And today I was having a discussion on missile force, etc., with some people in the system. Is that if you would develop credible missile force of 1,500 kilometers, or say, and reach their intermediate zone, and bring it under your strategic influence, it hurts the Chinese. It impacts the Chinese strategic balance. So what is happening is, from the Chinese perspective, is to utilize all efforts, capacities, capabilities, etc., to contain India and constrain India and prevent India from becoming a challenger, not now, tomorrow, day after, but by 2030 and beyond. Added to that is the fact is, like I had mentioned in my talk on China, is that there is a large amount of population within China. This thing is that India is a secondary direction. We have had our civilizational contacts with India. Why are we fighting India? Why is it that Indian perspective, India is being looked at as a challenger? And here, there are two schools of thoughts in China. There is a school of thought that India is becoming an aggressive power driven by its alliances with the West. And the second school of thought is intrinsically, strategically, India is a status quo power, non-expansionist power. India will not countermand China as long as China has a decent relationship with India. Therefore, what the Chinese continue to do is tell us we will resolve the boundary issue, but let's get back to the basic bilateral relationship. And we are saying that till we resolve the boundary issue, we cannot have a bilateral relationships. But there's a contradiction in terms here, and this is something important to note. The contradiction in terms is, take the United States. It swallows pride, sends Blinken over there. He doesn't get a very good reception. The readouts are not very good. Chinese actually read the riot act to him. And if you notice, Xi Jinping was sitting on a higher pedestal and he was looking down at this thing. And that's an interesting aspect which many people have noted. Yet, they want to create guardrails to ensure that the relationship of the China with the China doesn't get blown over. What we have done is, by our stand with the Chinese, we have put all eggs on one basket and driven by public opinion that till such time the boundary issue is resolved to its satisfaction, that is status quo ante or anything close to status quo ante which is acceptable, and in this case Depsang Jumar, etc., which are strategically important, so even General Bhatia and General Ahuja and you are all very clear about, is the situation is this. How do we proceed further? We have taken a political stand. A political stand is that we cannot go ahead with China till such time there is a resolution, in our perception, all CBMs are dead. There are no CBMs now functional with the China. So therefore, rebuild the CBMs and then we will talk. The Chinese say we have advocate, let's say, strategic stability along the borders. We will continue our discussions and build it up. Let's talk and let's start the bilateral dialogue. Now, this is the dilemma that faces both the countries, and this is something which has to be resolved politically. And I don't see it happening anytime soon, whether in the SCO meeting or in the G20. And it'll be now that's one of the tests is a, will Xi Jinping come? Two, will we have? I mean, if Xi Jinping come, we'll have to have a bilateral dialogue. And in the bilateral dialogue, what are we going to say beyond our stated positions? And if we're going to stick to the stated position, then the bilateral dialogue has no meaning. So I think I'll close here, stop here, and I talk.
I think you made the last point is very important. आपने last point बताया, अगर शी जिनपिंग यहाँ आएगा तो कुछ तो नतीजा निकलना चाहिए. अगर नतीजा नहीं निकलेगा तो उसका आने की भी जरूरत नहीं है, और इसीलिए एक मीटिंग तो टल गया, दूसरे मीटिंग के लिए देखेंगे. सर, जनरल भाटिया सर, योर टेक सर एंड योर व्यूज.
Uh, at the cost of repetition, I agree with Brig Sahgal. Uh, I think when you talk about civilization, one of the problems is that China does not understand India. Not that Indians understand China also, right? मेरे थोड़ा समझ से बाहर है when we had a growing relationship till 2019 अक्टूबर में बड़ा अच्छा रिलेशनशिप हमारा चल रहा था इकोनॉमिक चल रहा था डिप्लोमेटिक चल रहा था मिलिट्री टू मिलिट्री होते थे हैंड इन हैंड एक्सचेंज होते थे जन अहूजा भी गए हैं मैं भी गया हूँ चाइना एंड बड़े अच्छे सीडीएम्स थे 2013 में हमने BCDS बॉर्डर डिफेंस कोऑपरेटिव BDCA साइन करा बॉर्डर डिफेंस कोऑपरेटिव एग्रीमेंट साइन किया 2013 में आफ्टर दिप्सन राइट एंड सडनली जब ये 2020 में अप्रैल मई में जब ये हुआ तो आई थिंक चाइना का ये हिमालयन ब्लडर मोमेंट है they are now pushing India away from China whereas I think in the long term China will need India as much as India needs China or rather more so in this power matrix जो आप बता रहे हैं और उन्होंने हमको धकेल सा दिया है towards the US and that China will regret in the long term. Right? Because India is a balancing power and India could have easily balance the two and not be a this thing. So I think China has done the Himalayan blunder 62 moment China का moment है ये Himalayan blunder कर दिया उन्होंने अभी उनको भी लगता है कि इसको China के लिए face बहुत important है. Now they need a face saving strategy, a face saving strategy they will not get. उनके internal dimensions भी हैं. They can't be seen as weak. And they cannot be seen and they cannot take on India. The only thing I would like to add out here is India will have to understand that we cannot have a weak posturing with the Chinese. There is a continental Indian Ocean region. We have talked about 40 strategy the other day also. China को जो हमारी strategy है deterrence की, it is from a position of relative strength. Right? Otherwise, major problem हो सकती है irrespective of whatever we are because China is China and we haven't understood China's strategic intent honestly मैं बता रहा हूँ जितने latest discussions हो गए हैं जो उन्होंने किया है उसके strategic intent अभी तक काफी लोगों को समझ नहीं आया आगे तो ये बोलते हैं because of the DBO तो 20 साल से बन रहा है that's hardly you know what that road is all about that cannot be a strategic intent कि DBO road बन गया है शो DBO road तो उसकी वजह से चाइना नहीं किया मैंने बात बोलते हैं तो वहां पर हमको देखना पड़ेगा चाइना के strategic intent क्या है in the short term in the mid term in the long term and how do we then meet the China challenge and better China's aggressiveness that is the key challenge for India irrespective of civilization linkages, irrespective of what they talk, what they say, CBMs, agreements, जो भी मर्जी बोल रहे हैं, but ये हमको मसल से उसको करना पड़ेगा. Indian Ocean region में strategic vulnerabilities हैं, जैसे मैंने सैगल बोल रहे थे. We should not be only fixed towards the continent. We'll have to have an overall strategy, getting all together, and that is what I think we'll have to get a general.
Thank you, sir. I think you made आपने दो चार interesting point आपने बताया कि we are in a logjam which we have to take care of and we can't blink. But at the same time, we can't take it to a level where it becomes a firefight.
No
Gen
blinking,
Ahuja sir,
no blinking, no break mention.
No, yes sir. ये हमने बात भी किया पहले भी. So Gen Ahuja sir, your views on this?
See, what has just been covered, I think, is the crux of the discussion of this global power matrix that we've been having. That finally, at the end of the day, how do we manage our relationship with China? Because, like I had said, we have been put into a geographic frontline with a major power. Now, the dilemma that Brigadier Sahgal brought out, that today if we maintain that we will not have any other, till the time we settle the boundary question, these issues, rest of the issues, it will have its shadow on this. Now, this is a very challenging thing for us to address. Now, the question is, till the time it gets addressed, the basic foundation that, you know, accommodating with China does not help. You have to respond with power. That is the underlying thing, that even if yesterday, even when we had confidence building measures, border peace and tranquility agreements, even then, I think all of us who have been in this business of soldiering tried to suggest to people, don't lower your guard, build your capability. And that remains the basic cardinal thing even today. The second aspect is that by building capability while you deter, but at the same time, we have to make a distinction between management of our borders and between preparing our capability for all out war. Now, management of borders, yes, our confidence building measures have gone down the drain. As General Bhatia had mentioned, they've done a Himalayan blunder by ruining all these agreements. But still, I think the prudence demands that we salvage whatever is left of it. There is still merit in diffusing Yangtzes and Tawangs by having flag meetings than shooting at each other. And give a little time. Now, like we said, that there is going to be the dilemma if and when Xi Jinping comes to India. Now, what I look at it is very personally that we had friction points. 5 of the friction points we've sorted out. Our friction point in Debsang, Demchok, will they continue? I think the first and the foremost step there is to disengage from there, to bring it to status quo ante at even these two left off places. That gives us a starting point. Thereafter, let's build on it. We have agreed to have buffer zones at other places. Tomorrow, the two governments decide that with the advice of the military, with all concerned security planners, we decide to have buffer zones even in these areas. Well, so be it. Let's leave it out. Leave it to the wisdom of professionals today in uniform or the national security planners. But the fact is, let's manage this. Let's take incremental steps, because ultimately the geographies cannot be changed. And finally, I would like to say is that I think we've been very mature. And let's also grant to the majority of our friends, whether it's the Americans or it's the Russians, we have not gone to become the camp followers even of America in containing China. We've said that we are maintaining a free and open Indo-Pacific. We are not looking at containing any other country. So we know what are the realities of a geographic neighbor, and our partners appreciate what is the reality of India sitting here in this geographic location. So I think if we maturely handle this relationship, we extend understanding to our partners extend understanding to us, and India and China realize that yes, we will have competition, we will have issues of conflict, but we will have to live like neighbors. But let's take incremental steps and we can build on it. And time is a great healer, leveler, whatever we may say. And perhaps if during this coming meet, we decide to go to status quo ante in these two remaining fraction points, perhaps it may give a building block for taking it further. That's my suggestion.
थैंक यू, आपने बहुत अच्छी तरीके से ये सब एक्सप्लेन किया आप तीनों ने। मैं ये इस पार्ट ऑफ द डिस्कशन में इस तरीके से क्लोज करूंगा कि जैसे हम ऐसे विवाद कर रहे हैं, उसी तरीके से मेरे ख्याल में कहीं ना कहीं चाइना में भी ये सोच हो रहा होगा, और इसीलिए उन्होंने मेरे ख्याल में सबसे पहले बार ग्लोबल टाइम्स ने मैंने ये कल बात भी किया था कि पहली बार ग्लोबल टाइम्स हैज सेड दैट इंडिया इज अ रीजनल पावर, राइट। ये आज तक मैंने कभी सुना पढ़ा नहीं, और ये एडिटोरियल में उन्होंने लिखा है। तो देयर इज अ चेंज व्हिच इज हैपनिंग। The only problem in this is that in this thing of no blinking, no brinkmanship हमारी तरफ से, but we have to factor in the thing that Xi Jinping is a man in a hurry, right? And is a man in a hurry, and if he decides कल के दिन that he puts a little more pressure on the LAC to make way Indian Ocean region में, then it might be a problem. और जैसे हम चारों ने ये बात किया, इसको हम तभी टाल पाएंगे जब हमारा शक्ति बढ़ेगा, मिलिट्री शक्ति। जैसे जनरल सहगल साहब ने बताया, वी नीड लॉन्ग रेंज सिस्टम्स। जिस दिन वो लॉन्ग रेंज सिस्टम्स आ जाएंगे, वो अपने आप डिटरेंस हो जाएंगे। अगर हमारा नॉर्मल मिलिट्री पावर, बेसिक फंडामेंटल मिलिट्री पावर अलोंग द LAC अगर हम मजबूत करेंगे, जैसे हमारा पुराना DGMO और पुराना ADGMO ने बताया, तो देन देयर इज अ situation where we can handle the LAC in a slightly better manner, and that's the guardrails which I think we need to build, because बाकी diplomatic guardrails हुए, economic guardrails हैं, वो अपने आप बनते जाएंगे। And we'll have to see this year, I think इस साल थोड़ा crucial होगा, क्योंकि Xi Jinping ने यहाँ आना है, हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर वहां गए, इसका क्या परिणाम होगा और चाइना के ऊपर, और चाइना का क्या सोच विचार उभर के आएगा, ये देखने वाली बात है। वी आर लिविंग इन इंटरेस्टिंग टाइम्स।